Act 1. Nemesis. Fangelsi Cryogenic Prison, July 22nd, 2265. Nemesis settled into the clearing on Fangelsi as a herd of elk-like creatures bounded away. They stared at the frigate from the trees, their eyes glowing in the night. Just as Emmanuel Gray had planned, the spaceship had avoided the world's security net and landed undetected 2 valleys over from the planet's only structure, a maximum security cryogenic prison. Gray called for the men to assemble in the galley for a prayer service and went back to his tiny private quarters to get ready. He found himself looking at his face in the mirror, wondering how he had gotten to this state. He felt old for the first time in his life. Not tired, but aged. His 60 years showed in the gullies under his eyes, but he was still a vibrant man, able to run for miles and spar hand-to-hand with men half his age. His weariness wasn't physical, but more a reflection of the journey he'd taken. He'd been a general, a governor, and now he was a wanted man leading an untested crew in a crusade that could charitably be described as insane. For Emmanuel Gray, there was no going back. He felt the short goatee on his chin. Since he'd left the assault corps, he'd grown some facial hair, and he liked the way it filled his face out. It reminded him that his life was different now, that this hard-scrabble free-fall was way beyond normal structures. Gray put on the white collar that marked him as a bishop of a religious order simply known as Believers. The core of the faith was a disdain for alien species. As humanity had expanded out into the galaxy, it had met an abundance of intelligences. First contact became routine and spiritually troublesome. Many species believed, like humans did, that they had been created in God's image. The result was a crisis of faiths and a series of wars with humanity as the aggressor, the fire that burned down dozens of worlds. Over the previous 100 years, humans had fought 28 species to near extinction. In the last 20 years alone, it had been the Phelan, the Tiaski, the Devorin, the Zykool, and the Arnok. Goddamn spiders got into our minds, were ready for us, slaughtered us, made us desperate. He found his eyes in the mirror again. He knew desperate. Timberwolf Velez. Just saying the man's name exhausted him. What he'd done had been desperate, perhaps unforgivable, but it seemed like the only way at the time. Timberwolf Velez. Maybe there's no forgiveness for me. There was a knock at the door. Michael, Gray's second-in-command, entered without being asked. His face was scarred by plasma burns, and his bedraggled hair hung to his shoulders. "They're ready, Emmanuel." "Thank you, Michael. Hand me my vest." Gray put on the black vest Michael handed him. He caught Michael eyeing the lightning bolt over the breast pocket. He wondered if one day Michael would shoot him when his back was turned. He would certainly have cause to do it. In the galley, the men kneeled on prayer mats, the tables and chairs piled off to the side. The believer symbol hung on the wall at the front of the room. It looked like a Jesus fish turned downward and represented a closed eye. An eye that only saw the truth set out before it by God and excluded everything else. Gray stepped behind a podium and looked out at the soldiers, young, male, and all volunteers from prominent believer families. Some of them had believer marks on their foreheads and gazed up at Gray wide-eyed, like they might be raptured at any moment. All were veterans of some sort, and all bragged of combat experience, but Gray doubted almost every one of them. Before he'd gotten into the upper ranks, he'd run the Assault Corps training program out of Fort Chancellor. He'd trained thousands of men to fight the Phelan, the Tiaski, and other enemies. The men before him didn't have that 1,000-yard stare Gray knew so well. He could tell none of them had endured days of artillery, or slogged their way through the mile-high red forest on Phelan Prime, or fought street to street in the insurgencies that would flare up on human colonies. He'd wanted to fill the ranks full of mercenaries from Michael's stable, but Gray had backers that insisted that his ship be crewed by believers. So is this what I am now? A religious fanatic? Some closed-eyed warrior priest? He saw Michael in the back of the room, huffing and skeptical as he fell to his knees. Gray began, putting the boom in his voice from when he was a drill sergeant. God showed us the way from our world and sent his believers out to the stars. He told us to cleanse the way of all not made in his image. Behind Gray, a wild-eyed fanatic named Isabek took down his every word, scribbling frantically with a stylus into an electronic notebook. Gray continued. God means for us to cleanse his universe of aliens. We have closed eyes, no questions. We've done his will and fought almost every race we've come upon. Who fought the Phelan? The soldiers responded with a throaty cry of Ayah, and repeated it after the mention of each enemy. The Deverin, the Tiaski, the Zykel. Gray paused, scanning the room for someone he knew wasn't there. Who fought the Arnok? No one responded. Their heads hung with hints of shame. Gray's eyes saddened for a moment, and then filled with anger. We all fought the Arnok. Those damn spiders. You and me. We all gave too much to them. Like no other enemy, they took our minds, drove us to madness on contact. There are no veterans from that war. Michael stared daggers through Gray as he continued. You're the knights of a new crusade. The Arnok are what drives us. Our peace with them is a sin, and those that forged it will perish. The men nodded their heads. Gray grew in fury. Today is our first step towards healing from that peace. First we need the keys, then we open the door. We'll take the factory at Highland. Ayah, the men erupted. We'll make an army and finish our work. God's will be done on all our worlds, as it is in heaven. Gray finished solemnly, hanging his head and closing his eyes, like he was hung on the believer symbol behind him. At the back of the room, Michael stood, interrupting the moment. Gray's nostrils flared. Michael was always needling, questioning, unable to give up the past, looking for a way to settle accounts with Gray for what had happened so long ago. That goddamn son of a bitch. And what about those who don't believe? Michael demanded. An argument hung in the air between them that no one else knew about. Old wounds scraped raw again, and part of it, even when he didn't know it, was Timberwolf Velez. Before Gray could answer, the soldiers responded in unison with words out of their teaching. Cut them down! Gray had Michael in his sights, wishing the man had fallen to his death over Saturn's moon of Enceladus so many years ago. Ayah! Cut them all down! He bellowed with as much love and conviction as he could muster.